Welcome to Remembering the Forgotten, a space where leaders think out loud without polish or performance. No scripts, no personas, just the quiet clarity that emerges when the noise drops and the mind is free to speak for itself. Today, I'm joined by Scott, a stewardship coach who has spent more than a decade helping people master their time, their talent, and their treasures so they can live out the call that's already in them. Scott's path moved from biochemistry to leading large scale educational assessment teams and eventually into the work that shows him guiding individuals and leaders into clarity, discipline action, and a life aligned with purpose. He brings the rigor of a scientist, the steadiness of a coach, and the integrity of someone who has walked his own transformations. As the founder of Inspired Stewardship, Scott helps people simplify what feels overwhelming, build habits that hold under pressure, and reconnect to the deeper why behind money, leadership, and calling. He is someone who turns complexity into direction, and direction into a life that actually works. With that, Scott, welcome to my show. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Marcus. I really look forward to chatting with you today.
So do I. So before we begin, when I say stillness, I don't mean peace or quiet. I mean the place in you untouched by pressure, noise, or performance. The place that knows before the mind thinks. And that's the layer I'm inviting you to speak from today.
Okay, I can do that
Beautiful.
now. If you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have been able to go there.
So this will be beautiful because you'll be able to look back in the past and you'll be able to talk about now, which is a
Mhm.
beautiful, contrast. So, Scott, where in your life do you meet the you untouched by expectations?
I'm pretty deliberate about every morning. I have some quiet time, some time with just my coffee and no computer, no phone, no space that is buzzing and beeping and interrupting. And that tends to be the white space time where I can take a few minutes for meditation, for prayer, for silence, and listen kind of to those inner voices and calm them's not the right word, but dance with them in a way so that
Mhm,
I hear what they're saying, but sometimes it's listening to it and sometimes it's just letting go of it,
mhm.
and then kind of reset to start the day.
Do you have a special meditation you are using?
I have kind of what I call a breath prayer, and I use it not just in that time, but throughout the day. And it's your will, not mine. I'm a person of faith, and so for me, it's important that I try to listen to the Holy Spirit, listen
Mhm,
to the voice of I call God. I don't
mhm,
really care what name people put on it, but the bigger power that's outside of me
mhm,
to try to kind of get in touch with not just what I want in the moment, but
mhm,
what's really the more important or the deeper thing that I'm being called to do.
mhm.
And so I repeat that millions of times a day.
It's interesting. So this actually triggers quite an interesting question in me. When you hear God speak, do you hear God speak out there, or do you hear God speak inside?
Usually inside is where I hear it. However, if I don't listen to it inside, then I start to hear it outside. And what I mean by that is things start showing up to remind me of what I've been pushing down or ignoring or trying to not listen to, if that makes sense. This
It
is
does,
again
yeah.
back to that 20 years ago time frame. 20 years ago, I would spend a lot more time fighting with that internal voice and kind of, oh, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
pushing it down. And I've gotten better, nowhere close to perfect, but better at hearing it when it first comes instead of waiting and pushing it down. And then, typically what happens then is coincidences start showing up that
Mm-hmm.
aren't really
Mm-hmm.
coincidences. People talk about it. I'll see an article about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hear messages about it. My wife will say something about it. They'll come from outside, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So if I have your curriculum vita in front of me, in my eyes, that was when you were quite hardcore in business, right?
Yeah.
20 years
Yep.
ago.
Yeah. It was when I was working in corporate and
Yeah.
leading teams. That's when I was a school teacher for 16 years. And then I went into corporate for 11 years. I've done a million other things, but those are the two kind of big buckets.
Yeah.
And when I began to shift, I've always had a coaching approach, whether I was a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
whether I was a leader. I've
Mm-hmm.
always had a collaborative approach of leadership, not a directive approach of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But as I began to really work hard to study that and learn more about motivation, about leadership, about communication, about how I'm wired and how other people are wired, and as I began to develop a less judgment and more
Mm-hmm.
awareness,
Mm-hmm.
that I began to kind of let go of a lot of the fighting. I'm still a very driven person. I'm still a very,
Mm-hmm.
I want to get things done kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
but the mood behind it is different, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. It's less
Mm-hmm.
the action that's different and more the attitude,
Mm-hmm.
where it's no longer about being the best person in the room. It's just about being the best that I can be in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's funny. Actually makes me smirk because I just remembered what your mantra is.
Yeah.
Thy will, not mine.
Yep, exactly.
So basically, Scott is running and running and running. Oh, by the way, Lord, it's
Yep.
not my will, it's thy will.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yep. And
Left
and that
turn.
is a part of the reason that became my breath prayer is, there's a
I
joke. It's
totally
it's
get
it's
it.
attributed to Mark Twain. I don't believe Mark Twain said this because it just doesn't sound like Mark Twain. But the best day in my life was when I realized there was a God, and the second best day was when I realized it wasn't me. And there's a lot of truth to that, because for so long I would hold on to, it's all on me, it's all on my
Right.
shoulders, it's up to me, it's up to me, it's up to me, it's up to me. And it's not that that's wrong or false, but if that's where it stops, it sets you up for not real good relationships, not real good success, not real the stillness that you're talking about. You can
Mm-hmm.
never find that in that kind of attitude. But when your
Mm-hmm.
attitude shifts and you start realizing, well, yeah, I'm supposed to do stuff. Yes, I'm supposed to take action. This isn't about always just sitting back and being passive. Sometimes it is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's the
Mm-hmm.
action you're supposed to take.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that's still active in terms of you're making a decision that, hey,
Mm-hmm.
in this moment I'm not supposed to act, or hey, in this moment I
Mm-hmm.
am supposed to act. When but when that action or that drive to do it is no longer about competition or being the best person, it's no longer about what other people are. It's about, yeah, but what am I in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it is interesting. Someone who strives to wanting to be the best all the time, it's actually not about them, it's always about others,
It's usually about others. Yeah.
right? Which is crazy
Yeah.
because people would call that person egocentric. No, egocentric is literally, I don't feel I'm enough
Right.
compared to anyone else,
Yeah.
which is a paradox in itself. Totally self centered, but the actual focus is outside.
Right.
So once someone gets that, It's actually you need more focus on your own, more focus on yourself, and that actually takes the focus from outside inside. So you mentioned something 20 years ago, right? In your own coaching, how much do you share about the time 20 years back?
It depends on the situation. There are clients that I've shared lots of details, and then there are clients that that's not relevant or important. Again, even within coaching, it's kind of a, it's not really about me, it's about them, And so I think of everything, including my personal story, as tools in a toolbox. Not, my goal isn't to just get to tell my story to my clients, but at the same time, there are times where that's relevant and appropriate and needed. And then I have no hesitation to share it. And again, that's a change too. 20 years ago, I would have a hard time saying things like, I grew up in the home of an alcoholic father.
Yeah,
Now I
yeah,
just say, I grew up in the home with an alcoholic father. That's
yeah.
a
It's
fact.
just a fact.
It's not a
Absolutely.
judgment. Yeah.
Right,
And it
right,
doesn't mean I don't love my father. And it doesn't mean
right.
that I'm okay with. There were things about him that I admired and loved and I learned from. And then there are things about him that
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, I don't want to take that piece. I can leave that
yeah,
behind.
yeah.
But that's not something that comes easy.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier. It's the difference between self-development or self-focus and self-ishness. I
Mm-hmm,
think a lot of
mm-hmm,
times is it because when we're selfishly focused,
mm-hmm,
it's really about manipulating other things.
mm-hmm,
It's manipulating the situation. I want to create things so that I always am on top.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And when you're selfless, but still developing yourself,
mm-hmm,
it's no longer just about, can I win? It's the focus is first on, are others winning? And often out of that, things come along that make, I win
mm-hmm,
too, but it's
mm-hmm,
my
mm-hmm,
focus is first on the other.
mm-hmm,
And, so it's not always win-win, and it's not always win-lose. And it's not all, it's how am I doing this best for everyone else? And often that comes back on you just naturally, but that's not your goal. That's not the
mm-hmm,
purpose behind it. And again,
mm-hmm,
I want to keep saying this, and something I struggle with every day. It is not, this is not a posture that you just naturally adopt forever, and you never stumble or fall
mm-hmm,
or struggle with it. I think it's something where, and it's not that you can't get better at it. It's not that you can't learn it. It's not that can't,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
coaches like you, it's not that other people can't help you with it, but it isn't, you're never done.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
There's always another button that you realize,
mm-hmm,
yeah, look, there's a new one. I didn't
mm-hmm,
realize that when this happened, or this situation, or this particular string of words, nouns and adjectives and verbs that somebody puts together, turns out that's a trigger for me. I didn't even know it. I wasn't aware because that's never come to my awareness before. Now, what am I going to do with that information? What am I going to how am I going to take action, or how am I going to work through this, and work past it, or at least work to the point of calmness and acceptance with it.
mm-hmm,
That, because again, even past is sometimes that makes it sound done. It's,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
it's the journey, not the destination. You know,
mm-hmm. I
which is a
feel
cliche, but real.
this is something which I sometimes wonder, Scott. There is always this question of how can I build trust?
Hmm.
And as you can imagine, I've been in business for almost 30 years, and I spoke with countless of coaches,
Hmm.
and the majority has to admit sooner or later that they do not know how to build trust.
Sure.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think trust requires a degree of vulnerability in yourself that I don't think most of us are comfortable going to. Um, it's a it's about I honestly, it's kind of like what I was just talking about. You know, if my goal was to always share my story, that doesn't build trust. And yet at the same time, being comfortable being able to share my story,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
can build trust. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not if I wasn't comfortable, that would also not build trust.
Uh-huh.
So it's that vulnerability and openness to let things go where they're going to go in a natural way. And I think a lot of times as coaches, we get so caught up in the process that we forget the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the people are actually the important part. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the process is just a tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, that's not the that's not the drive. That's not the purpose. That's not, it's just a tool. And
Mm-hmm.
we get locked in, especially, and honestly, I think there's a lot of coach training that teaches it that way, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
teaches it as here's the 7 steps, or here's the 3, you know,
Mm-hmm.
frameworks or processes. And to be clear, it's not that having a framework or a process is bad. That's not what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying either. It's just when
Mm-hmm.
that's the only focus and you lose sight of the people part of it,
Mm-hmm.
um, it doesn't build relationship. It doesn't build trust. It builds callousness, for lack of a better word. It comes across and as well, you're still holding something back. And I don't think a
Mm-hmm.
coach can really hold something back from the relationship. They've got to really be willing and able to put it all on the table. And again, that doesn't mean you always will, but you've got to be willing and able to do it if it's needed. That's my 2 cents. I don't.
I love that because basically when we look at the coaching world, especially our conversation now in terms of coaches, um, I sometimes wonder whether vulnerability actually goes along with authenticity.
Mhm.
And we spoke about that, on personal calls before. Authenticity is not wearing my life on my sleeve, but having integrated my own life story in a way that it actually speaks. You mentioned that you're a person of faith.
Mhm.
I grew up in an evangelical home, and I could never understand why people would evangelize, bother other people who didn't want to hear zip of it. Because I thought, what if I actually do not speak about Christ, but I live so people ask me, Marcus, what's different with you? And I believe it's very similar with coaching.
Mhm.
So many people go into coaching and they go into coaching and they basically put on a mask, so they become a coach. And then they put on a coat, which is coaching. However, the person underneath is just the holder of that frame. And you never get to that coach at all as a person because that coach needs you as a coach.
Mhm.
This actually leads me to my next question for you. If you look back in your life, Scott, where was a moment where you realized, wow, this is not my script I'm living? This is someone else's script. And what cracked it open?
So one of the big, and there's been more than one answer to that question
Okay.
throughout my life. But probably the single biggest moment is my wife and I went through a period where we were struggling financially. This was back when I was
Mhm.
still a school teacher before I took the corporate job. In fact, in the middle of the recovery from this is when I changed to the corporate job. and where I was, we basically had more debt than I made in a year.
Mhm.
I was kind of taking on all of the burden of that because I was being a good husband and I was going to protect my wife from all of this. My wife's a smart lady; she knew what was going on, but I was going to protect her. Well, she wanted to protect me, so she's not talking to
Mhm.
me. I'm not talking to her. We're
Mhm.
growing apart. We were pretty close to probably divorcing over finances. I
Mhm.
was actually suicidal because of finances. Of course, I wasn't sharing any of that with anyone either.
Mhm.
I was keeping all of that bottled up, which makes it worse, not better. So, as we were going through all of that, um, I began again. This is one of those hearing the voice inside myself, but ignoring it and fighting against it and pushing it out. They changed the lineup on the radio. So here's the irony: I would drive home late at night and I was planning my suicide by pretending to fall asleep and drive off the road and have a car accident.
Okay.
But I would listen to talk radio because it was the only thing that would keep me awake.
Gotcha.
Right. You think about that sentence logically and you kind
Mhm.
of go,
Mhm.
really? Why were you
Mhm.
trying to, why were you trying to
Mhm.
stay awake? But anyway, this is
Mhm.
anyone who's been in these dark night of the soul moments, it's not logic.
It's
That,
not
that's
logic. No, absolutely
that,
not. No.
there's no logic operating in those moments.
No.
And they changed the lineup on the radio, and all of a sudden they started playing. It happened to be the Dave Ramsey show,
Mhm.
where there were people talking about finances and talking about debt and talking about getting free
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
it and this, that, and the other thing. And I got mad. I got furious. I got angry with the radio. I began to argue with the radio. And after about a week of that, I realized all of a sudden that for the first time in a long time, instead of thinking about committing suicide, I was actually mad at this person, on this total stranger, and group of
Yeah.
strangers, because it wasn't even just Dave, it was other people. I heard someone come on and talk about getting free from debt, and their situation wasn't identical to mine, but there were a lot of similarities. And he talked about, I had to come clean, I had to open up to my
Mhm.
wife, we had to work
Mhm.
together. And I realized all of a sudden that I was angry instead of suicidal in that moment.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was one of those moments of, again, that voice that had been telling me to come clean and talk to my wife had been telling me, hey, look, if you want to get through this, y'all are going to have to work at it together. It's going
Mhm.
to require radical change. You're going to have to live your life completely different. You're going to have to leave everything about the old you behind and become a new
Mhm.
person. Are you willing to do it?
Mhm.
That made me hear that again in a clear
Mhm.
way. So
Mhm.
literally that Saturday, I took my wife out for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and we went to drive down to the lake and came clean and said, hey, this is what's going on. And like I said, she knew all of this already, but she was protecting me. I was protecting her.
Mhm.
Neither one of us was protecting the other. We were actually making it worse. And by Monday, we had started making radical changes in what we were doing, how we were living, what we were thinking. The corporate job, and in part, was because of some of those things, and it was something that I chose to do very deliberately, in
Mhm.
part because of finances, but also in
Mhm.
part because of other opportunities and
Mhm.
other reasons. So all of that change kind of happening together was one of those moments of it, flipping a switch. But from a Friday to a Monday, it's like, okay, I'm leaving a lot of that behind and moving on. Now, again, like I said earlier, it's a journey, not a destination. It's not like that
Mhm.
was a perfect switch and everything was
Mhm.
magically better. That's not what I mean. There
Mhm.
was a lot of hard work that came
Mhm.
after that, but it was what opened the door to saying, we're going to do this.
That's beautiful. So thank you very much for sharing this. And I can tell you this will help countless of people who watch our show. Because that's exactly the vulnerability and authenticity I personally believe actually makes you the damn good coach you are, Scott. And if you can share even more because you become more courageous. And why courageous is because if your story is not shared, somebody else will never hear it in time. This is literally why I do what I do.
Hmm.
I'm not sure whether you know that, but my goal is to have 104 guests within 1 year. And I will publish 2 shows a week for a whole year. I'll have a library where no one who gets to hear about that channel will have issues not finding help. Because imagine people like you times 104. There's nothing that will be untouched in the end.
Hmm.
So I highly encourage you to really have even more courage to think, you know what? I am first and foremost God. Coaching is a methodology I use, but people do not need that methodology. People need Scott, who has internalized that methodology, and the methodology speaks through you to those
Hmm.
people. I'm not sure whether you know that, but 95% of coaches cannot even make their ends meet
Yeah.
financially. And why do you think that is? People do not trust them. It's not that I'm a salesman and I suddenly look for clients who want to buy my tires. It's a whole different story what we're talking about.
Hmm.
A whole different story. So thank you so much for sharing this. So when you look back, can you tell me about the moment when all the noise fell away? And I assume it could be very much what you shared before. When all the noise fell away and something in you knew exactly what was true, when you felt that stillness. Can you remember such a moment?
Again, lots. The one I shared is definitely an example, but I'm gonna share a different one. Um, and again, a personal story. So I mentioned earlier that I grew up in the home of an alcoholic. My father
Hmm.
was an alcoholic,
Hmm.
and my mother and him had divorced over the years for reasons that I won't go into because it's not my story to share. It's hers. But
Absolutely.
at that point, my father ended up in the hospital, um,
Hmm.
suffering from what seemed to be like a total mental breakdown, total dementia.
Hmm.
I can remember him sitting in the hospital bed. He was a smoker, and I can remember him, putting his fingers up to his lips with the cigarette. Of course, there's no cigarette. He's in a hospital bed, and holding an ashtray in his left hand and flicking the ashes, off, and then reaching over and taking a swig of beer. Of course, there's no beer, and and then putting the cigarette back in his mouth because that muscle memory was so
Yeah.
ingrained in him that that was still his identity and who he
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
And sitting in the hospital room, watching this with my mother sitting there and trying to help my dad do a crossword puzzle because he was always big into crossword puzzles, and of course his mind is completely gone, so he really can't do it. And that moment of seeing him so vulnerable and so weak,
Hmm.
for lack of a better word. And of course, your dad is always somebody that I'm an adult, but
Hmm.
he's still my dad, and he's still a
Hmm.
strong person in my eyes. And coming to peace with that in that moment, and realizing that for all of his failings and for all of his faults and for all of his all of the things that I was angry with him about, and all of those things and that history, that it didn't really matter in a way.
Hmm.
um Kind of coming to peace with it in that moment, and I know peace is not the word you mean, coming to stillness with it in that moment,
Hmm.
and being able to kind of open that up inside myself and say, this is just who he is. He's a man,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
he has tremendous failings and he has tremendous gifts, and that's who he is. I think helped me a lot because he passed shortly thereafter. And,
Hmm.
I was able to lay down a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger. I truly forgave him in that moment for
Hmm.
things that he had done, and um, you know, things that I believed he had done and things that he had actually
Hmm.
done, all of those
Hmm.
things.
Hmm. Hmm.
And was able to kind of come to stillness with it, and lay it down and leave it behind, in a way. It's still part of who I am and part of my journey, but it's also, um, it takes, in a way, the proper amount of placement in my history, as opposed to before that moment. It was much, much, much larger than it really needed to be, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
If not dealt with, it literally takes over your personality,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's basically just this little bit, but not dealt with. It's huge.
Yeah, it was much bigger than it needed to be until
Hmm.
that moment.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's why that experience of seeing him do that,
Hmm.
it's kind of seared into my head in a way,
Hmm.
because that was the moment where I was able to kind of go to that quiet place and say, okay, this is just who he is. This is just who he
Hmm.
was. This is just who he
Hmm.
would always be.
Hmm.
But that's not my fault. It's
Hmm.
not on me to have fixed him. It's
Hmm.
not. um, I was able to take the appropriate level of ownership and
Hmm.
responsibility for it.
Hmm. Yeah, and literally to realize my dad is not sitting in his hospital bed right now because of me or anything
Yep.
I've done. It was his own decisions.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I can very much relate to that. I tell you that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
And
for
by
a
the
lot
way,
of
when I
us.
speak of stillness,
Uh huh.
peace is an outcome of it. So stillness is basically the room where your mind and your heart go into coherence. And as a natural result, peace comes from it. Intuition comes from it. Basically, all these executive functions come from it. So don't try to replace it with stillness because it literally is an outcome of stillness, which
That makes
is
sense.
absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Mm,
Because,
it
some
does make
people
sense.
call it soul, and that's stillness.
Hmm.
Some people call it intuition, and that's stillness. Because it's literally, and you probably can tell as well, like when we talk, it's just us. There is no noise in the room at all. It's almost like we are in a dome,
Hmm.
and that's what stillness is. It keeps all the noise outside. And yeah, this is why I love what happens, because when stillness really starts taking over, that's when your soul starts speaking.
Hmm.
Probably see it in your own coaching as well, that suddenly people go quiet, and then you see they're going somewhere, and then they start talking. And that's when this coherence took over, because the mind is in constant chatter. And
Right.
as we know, 97% is unconscious or subconscious, and basically all of it is negative.
Right.
So going into that stillness basically means going into a place which is whole. And that's why I asked you in the very beginning deliberately, Scott, whether you hear that voice outside or whether you hear that voice called God inside.
Hmm.
It's actually inside.
Yeah. No, that's where I hear
But
it.
then when we don't listen, this
Yeah.
inside starts literally managing anything outside to wake us up,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
highly fascinating.
Yeah. Our and I love that you use the word, integral, or it all together, that the integer, you hear these words and we forget that all of those words mean wholeness, that an
Yes.
integer, whole, we call them whole numbers, right? Integrity,
Yeah.
you used authenticity earlier. These words are about wholeness. They're about being able to knit things together into a unified whole. And for me, that's, again, journey, not a destination. That's a constant ongoing process. It's not something that I claim to have mastered, but you're right. As a coach, when we can ask that question, that you see it in the client's eyes, it's like click, and then the words come, and it's like, and of course, as a coach, the most important thing there is to remember to shut up. It's like mute the mic, don't say anything,
Hmm.
let it
Hmm.
happen, let it
Hmm.
happen.
Hmm.
Because all too often I see coaches step on that with
Oh
another
yeah.
question, and it's like,
Hmm.
no, let the silence happen.
Hmm.
Um, we get more comfortable ourselves with those silences and those gaps whenever we become more whole ourselves.
Hmm.
And I think as coaches, you're right. I think when a coach stops just putting on coaching as a coat and it just starts becoming part of who they are. I will, however, say that I also have listened very clearly to my wife, and there are times that she will tell me, stop being a coach and
Hmm.
be my husband.
Hmm.
That's important too.
Likewise.
you know, and luckily I have a wife that has learned to say that out loud, because you're right.
Can be
You're right.
absolutely annoying as a partner. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I'm being a coach right now, and I need to be your husband. I get it. I
Yeah.
apologize. Let me go back to husband mode. Um, and not that I can't ever coach with my wife, but there's a time and a place for it, and then there's a time and a place where it's like, no, show up as the husband in that moment.
Do you know what I especially realized about my wife? What she really wants from me is to listen.
Hmm.
And that's it.
Yeah, that's another one of those phrases that my wife has learned. She will come to me now and she'll say, okay, I've got a situation at work and I want to lay it out for you, and I would like your input, or I would like your advice, or I would like some suggestions. It's like, okay. And then there are other times she comes in and she goes, I've got a situation at work, I'm going to share it, you just need to listen.
Mhm.
Okay. With
Mhm.
clear direction like that, I can manage to do it.
Mhm.
It's like I can follow
Mhm.
directions. But we had to talk about that, of
Mhm.
hey, my inclination is to want to help solve and
Mhm.
problem solve and work through this. And if that's not what you need, or that's not what you want, just tell me, and
Mhm.
I'm happily not give you advice. That's
Mhm.
not at all necessary to our relationship.
Mhm.
But sometimes if I'm not clear, that's where I'm going to go,
Mhm.
and you need to let me know if that's not what you need or that's not what you want.
Mhm.
And sometimes she's not aware, and so she'll share, and then I start giving, talking through and giving it. She's like, you know what, I really don't need advice right now, I just need you to listen. It's like, okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
I can
I'm
stop.
pretty sure
you
many,
know
many husbands listen to us and many wives listen to us now. So, what if the same thing is true with our coachees or clients as it
it
is
usually
with our
is.
spouses? If we actually just listened and they would then say, what do you think?
Hmm.
Because it's not that a woman or a man needs the guidance from the other side to start to speak. It's not that they forget that they want advice. So, this is actually just something I learned right
Yeah.
now, that I rather wait until my wife says to me, Marcus, what are your thoughts? And if she doesn't ask, I won't say anything. Because let's be honest, why is it that coaches say the answer all lies in the client itself. This is only half true. If you, as a coach, do not have that resonance vessel in you, which allows the coachee or your client to actually go into stillness.
Mhm.
So the soul, or whatever you want to call it, God or Buddha, whatever, starts talking to them. No, they do not have the answers. But I believe, especially in our case, to simply listen and be quiet until the other person says, Marcus, what are your thoughts? From now on, I literally just listen. And even if I haven't said a word, I'll walk away. Because it's not about what I have as an input.
Mhm.
That person does have the answers, but it takes that listening, and that listening is stillness. To believe, you know what, honey, I provide this safe room for you, and I just listen. And this gives you the peace, this gives you the safety to actually start letting the thoughts in you rise. Because the answers are down there, not up here.
Mhm.
They're down here. So isn't that amazing if you think about it?
Mhm.
Wow.
Well, it's also about the attitude of ownership. And
Mhm,
what I mean by that is, who owns the coaching process? Who owns the coaching relationship? Is it the client? Yes. Is it the coach? I would also say yes.
mhm,
Is it co-owned and co-created?
mhm,
That's probably the more authentic place to recognize it from.
mhm.
And so it's because, again, as the coach, do you have any responsibility to the process and to the experience and to the trust and to the vulnerability? Absolutely. But so does the client. And I think sometimes some coaches think it's wholly client owned, and some
Mhm,
coaches think it's wholly coach
mhm.
owned. And I try to create a coaching relationship that is more co-owned. Um, and again, I don't think that's as easy
Mhm.
as I'll own it or they'll own it,
What
but
if it's
it's
not
more
owned at
authentic,
all? What if
you
it's
know.
not owned at all?
Yeah, owned is the word. And again, I hesitate with that
I know
word
the
because
methodologies behind it. I'm
you
pretty
know
much aware of those coaching teachings.
yeah, owned is the word that I'm using, but I don't think it's the right word either, if that
I don't
makes
think you
sense.
actually do that.
Yeah.
Pretty much so.
Probably not, but yeah, I'm struggling. Well, and we've talked about this already a little bit, and in other conversations too. Part of the problem is I don't think we have the right language
Yes,
for
absolutely.
relationships and trust, and
We do
we
not.
use those words, but
Yeah,
the word that when you say trust, what you mean and the images that are in your head and in your heart are probably not the same as they are in mine, because we're two
absolutely
different
true.
people with two different sets of experiences.
Yes,
It's not
yes,
because you're wrong and I'm right, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's just
right.
we're different. you know
Yes,
and
yes.
acknowledging that and owning that is part of it too, because I struggle with the language that we would use for it sometimes too, because you're right, it's not ownership, not in the sense of
Because it puts a pressure on you.
yeah, yeah.
Literally puts a pressure on you. Because you know what's interesting? When I went through this last 12 months, I literally went as deep as a human being just can go. I tell you that much. And for me, it literally dawned that what I really provide my clients on any level, the higher up they go, the more I do that, is really provide that safe space
Safe space, yeah.
where all the noise can drop. where all the stressors that were there just 5 minutes ago, they're just gone outside. And their inner being can, maybe for the first time in their life, start talking to them.
Mm,
Because to be honest, I really feel that coaching has it quite wrong. And it's not about what coaching talks about, it is. I believe it is about facilitating a safe space where all the noise can drop and where the other people can, a person can say, you know what? Never looked at it this way.
mm,
And you know, you haven't said a word, but you provided that safe space.
mm.
So let me go into one another question, and then I go to the last question soon. So, what most pulls you out of yourself? Meaning, when do you lose stillness? And what lets you return, Scott?
The most the answer is distractions, but
Okay.
that's a bit of a cop out in an answer, and so I want to go deeper than that. Um, what I mean by distractions here isn't just, the notification going off on my phone or an email popping up or whatever. It's when I allow the space, a lot of times it's environment or space, literal physical space,
Mhm, mhm,
um, to take on a prominence that interrupts the sacredness
mhm,
of the moment. When other things begin to dominate, and again, I talked earlier about trying to be very careful to create time in the morning for
mhm, mhm,
quiet. When I don't do that,
mhm,
when I don't hold to the rhythm and the sacredness of the moment, and whether that moment is the moment you and I are having this conversation
mhm,
right now, whether the moment
mhm,
is that quietness in the morning, whether the moment is listening to my wife, and putting away the
mhm,
distractions. It's when I don't hold to the sacredness of that quiet or that moment or that space,
mhm,
that's when I'm allowing distraction in. Because
mhm,
and I want to be clear, distraction there could be, yes, my phone would just went off and takes my
mhm,
attention, but it,
mhm,
it doesn't have to be something like that. It can even just
mhm,
be that the distraction of, I'm talking to you, but I'm thinking about the 72 other things that I need to get done this afternoon, and am I going to have time to get them done, and blah blah blah. All of that,
mhm.
stuff that we allow ourselves to go into and on with internally or externally, that pulls us away from the sacredness of that quiet or that stillness inside ourselves.
Beautiful and impressive. So, what do you do to get back into that stillness?
Recognize that I'm not there. um
Interesting. So
I
that's the
think
first step.
it's, yeah, the
Awareness. Huh?
first step is to acknowledge that I'm not there,
Mhm,
and to recognize that, and
mhm,
recognize even more than acknowledge, because I think sometimes I'm blind to it.
mhm,
I've gotten out of the moment, but I don't even realize that I've gotten out of the moment. So the first step
mhm,
is to recognize it. Once I recognize it, for me, again, I go back to the breath prayer that I was talking
mhm,
about.
mhm,
I go back to something that has become almost instinctual, as an acknowledgement of, oh, you're not there, you got to get back there. I've, again, it's become reflexive in a way. It's like blinking. It's
Mhm.
literally become, oh, I'm not there, I need to get back there. Your
Mhm.
will, not mine. Your will,
Mhm.
not mine.
Mhm.
And usually that's enough to get me going back to, that email's not important, those other 72 things aren't important. What's important is that I spend this moment with Marcus, and I'm here, I'm present, I'm listening, I'm engaging, and I'm reflecting, holding the space. It's a verbiage for me that reminds me of, like you said, it is about, we're creating that sacred space for a
Mhm.
moment of one person talking, connecting to another. And that, once I recognize it and then repeat that,
Mhm.
probably a good 80 to 90% of the time, that's enough now to pull me back
Mhm.
into that space. The other 10%, it requires a little bit stronger intervention. And, maybe my wife has to say something to me, or I have to literally physically walk away or go for a walk, or it's been enough of a disruption that I need to disengage and re-engage more actively. But typically, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, that's enough now to kind of get me to start going back to that place of quiet.
And I know for sure this didn't come overnight.
Oh no.
So
No,
everyone
no,
who
no, 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 no.
listens, who starts on that journey, just be warned, it is not coming overnight. Doesn't
Right.
matter what anyone tells you.
Well, and it doesn't happen 100% of the time either. I don't think
No,
we ever get to a point where we stay in those moments. And I don't know that we're even supposed to stay in those
that's
moments
the
of stillness
thing.
100% of the
Goodness me,
time.
we are human,
Yeah.
and we
You
should
know,
be proud of being human. You know, we have
yeah.
become human doings. We have become human achievings. We have become human gatherings. We have become human wantings. The furthest away from a being,
And the being is the part that we forget.
right? And if we
Yeah.
actually put the being aside and simply become human, I believe that's where we really in nirvana or in paradise on earth.
Yeah. Um,
Simply to say, gosh, I am who I am and how I am, and it's okay. And I strive every single day to be a little bit more
a little bit more, a
better,
little bit better, a little bit.
different.
Yeah.
Yes, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
already leads me to my last question, Scott. And the last question is deep. Picture this. If someone is listening, feels lost in the noise, what is one thing you'd want them to remember is still true?
It's really kind of what we were just talking about. So the way I say it is remembering that life is a film strip, not a photograph. What I mean by that is that no matter what, the moment you're in right now will be different later. That when you're in a moment in the dark place of the soul, that can be inspiring. But it's equally important to remember that even when you're on the top of the mountain, when you're having those moments of, oh, everything is going my way. Yeah, remember, it's not a photograph, it's a film strip. Tomorrow will be different. Doesn't mean it'll be worse, doesn't mean it'll be better, just means different, and it lets us start moving from measuring life as a scorecard
Mhm.
to living life for the moment that we're in, whatever it is. What can I take away from this moment? What is this moment supposed to be teaching me? What lesson am I learning? What being am I experience? What is this moment, as opposed to, is this moment good? Is this moment bad? And am I, how can I make this better? Again, those are distractions from the present.
Mhm.
And when the more we can live and experience the present moment for whatever it is and not try to put value to it, I think the more authentically
Mhm.
we begin to live the life that we have, whatever it is.
Beautiful. Or as a friend of mine would say, this too shall pass,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
And everything has a season. And
Absolutely does.
yeah.
So with that, Scott, thank you so much for having been my guest. It was a great honor to have you on my show today.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor to continue our conversation and deepen it.
And this won't have been the last one, my friend, for sure. So this was Remembering the Forgotten, a conversation held in clarity, not performance. If something in this exchange helped you see differently, carry that forward.